Thank you, Zolani, for that very enlightening talk on City of Johannesburg network rollout. I'm not sure in my panel we will discuss who pays. So please come to that. We've got some very exciting guests coming. I'm not sure you've heard the phrase, if it's free, then you are the product. And I certainly think that that is exactly what's happening with Wi-Fi. The next speaker is Brian Pinnock from Internet Solutions. Again, one of the lead funders of this forum up to now, and we'd like to thank them very much for that, who will present to us on Wi-Fi innovation with a focus on Wi-Fi analytics. Brian is the General Manager of Information at Internet Solutions. He has worked in various technology-related positions in both SA and internationally over the last 20 years. You don't look that old, Brian. He was also part of our IS Labs team, which is helping web tech startups make the internet, South African internet better. So please welcome Brian Pinnock.
Well, thanks very much, Raj. Good morning, everybody. When I was asked to do this presentation on Wi-Fi innovation, I actually groaned because I knew that Andile would be speaking before me, and he'd choose all the to actually talk about all the sort of cool new Wi-Fi technologies, and he did most of that. But what I did was I actually thought the problem with us generally, and I think most people in this room are actually technologists, is we tend to think of innovation immediately. We think of technology and innovation, and we totally forget about the process and the people side of innovation. So I thought what I'd do today is a slightly different take on things, and I think if I did, as the Americans say, if I did a whole presentation on Wi-Fi innovation, the latest speeds and feeds and fast Wi-Fi, and that, it'd be a bit like what the Americans call teaching grandma to suck eggs. I think there's people in this room who know a lot more about this than I do. As a general manager of innovation at Internet Solutions, my job is to obviously be sort of mile wide on most different types of technology, and then by definition that means I sort of sometimes go a little bit more than inch deep, but I certainly don't go as deep as a lot of the sort of very, very technical people do. So what I did here is really just took a case study of something we've done recently in Wi-Fi, what we consider to be a Wi-Fi innovation, and I'm just going to take you through it. One of the key things about innovation everybody always talks about is disruptive innovation. And there's a really great quote that was doing the rounds about a year ago, specifically with a whole lot of people leaving Microsoft in the Surface tablet sort of debacle that happened initially. And it's this quote from Ernest Hemingway that said, sort of, how did I go bankrupt? Well, sort of first gradually and then suddenly. And I think that's exactly what happens with disruptive innovations, is we kind of see them coming from a long way off. And I don't think there's any organization in the world that has been disrupted, from Kodak to Blockbuster to any of these companies. In fact, Kodak is a great example of a company that actually knew so much about digital photography that when it finally filed for bankruptcy protection, one of the most valuable assets that was left of the company was all their digital photography patents. So it's not that technologists inside an organization don't know about all this new innovation coming along. It's that the organizations themselves are not able to change quickly enough to change and actually adapt to these new innovations. And I think this is something particularly mobile operators and fixed line telecommunications companies and ISPs need to be very, very cognizant of. It's not that our technologists are not aware of these new technologies, it's how they potentially upend business models. So what I'm going to do is take you through a very, very brief case study. So unfortunately, this is not meant to be a brag slide. It does kind of come out as this in a forum like this, and this is not the intention. But really what I'm going to be focusing on is part of Internet Solutions is a brand called Always On. And we've recently split out part of that business with a joint venture between the NUSPAS group, particularly MultiChoice, where we've got an organization now called Wireless Co. And what Wireless Co has got is a whole lot of Wi-Fi zones in various precincts. There's a whole lot of stats that you see on your right-hand side of the slide there, sort of north of 1,800 hotspots. Most 220 of them are carrier grade, and we'll talk about that in some of the panel sessions, what exactly does carrier grade actually mean. Providing access to more than 1 million hotspots globally. 2.8, I think the key thing here is 2.8 million sessions per month, with 1 million unique new visitors 1 million visitors per month, and 30% of them being new. So there's a whole lot of kind of stats around this, and really what I want to kind of bring to bear is not just sort of, this is a whole lot of stuff and we're quite a big Wi-Fi player in South Africa. The issue here is what we have is a business model that was doing incredibly well for itself, and something new came along and we weren't quite sure how to deal with this new technology and how it was going to upend the business model. So as you can see from all of that stuff, we had kind of some small loss leader free Wi-Fi that kind of log on and get your sort of first few minutes free for a while, but then actually become a paying customer. We did some brand-funded Wi-Fi. We did a deal a while back with Samsung, whereby a whole lot of the new Samsung users were able to get access to always-on accounts, funded partially and wholly in some cases by Samsung. But really what it was is, to use a sort of a rough figure, 95% a user pays model. Now, some new technology came along a while back, and the new technology is what we've deemed, we call it Internet Solutions Social Wi-Fi. And really all it is a combination of a series of technologies that allow you to do certain things. So first of all, log in using a social media login. So no longer this sort of clunky, give us your name and password and email address and all of that. Now just give us your Facebook account and you're in. Second thing is this ability to do what's been called in marketing terms is the sort of hyperlocation aware technology. So this ability to actually find out where you are and track you to within a few meters, as opposed to the kind of usual sort of, we know you're in a room, as opposed to the fact that you're actually standing in front of that flat screen TV and you may or may not be about to buy it. The other part of this technology that allows you to do is actually provide offers and advertising to users. So it provides the capability to completely change the business model. So you've got this ability to, first of all, gather a whole lot of information, do analytics on it, and then also provide information and marketing information and marketing offers to people. So potentially incredibly useful to a whole bunch of kind of people. So brands, potentially retailers and retail malls are the very obvious initial end customers of this kind of a service. So these are the sorts of things that you can do. So you can push relevant content to a user. This is just an example of a coffee shop where you can push a voucher saying, this is your first time here, here's a free voucher for a sandwich or a cup of coffee, whatever it is. If it's your birthday, we say, well, thank you for sorry, let me just go back a second. If it's your birthday, we can provide you with a voucher. If it's, all of those sorts of things, basically providing offers based on a whole lot of information. This is your 10th trip to the coffee shop, so here's your free cup of coffee or your free piece of cake or whatever the case is. You can push video advertising, so you could have a brand, for example, like Coca-Cola. If you walked into a macro store, as an example, say your free Wi-Fi session today is sponsored by Coca-Cola. All you've got to do is watch this 30-second Coca-Cola advert, and then you can basically browse to your heart's content until you leave the store. Those are the kind of things that are available. Gives a whole lot of analytics type information, so the ability to kind of do heat maps, see where most of the people are standing. And then the key thing is actually combining that information. So not just the fact that you were standing in front of that Samsung flat screen TV section of the store, but the fact that you were maybe browsing on one of these price check applications, and that the store can actually say to you, for you, especially context aware, etc., I'm going to actually give you a 15% discount off all Samsung TVs or flat screen TVs in general, whatever the case may be. So very, very high potential technology, a lot harder to actually make it work in practice, but there's a whole lot of stuff that's come a long way, but there's potentially a whole lot that can be done. So I lead a team at Internet Solutions where we look at a whole lot of new technology. We look at it not just from a technological perspective, we look at it also from a business model perspective. And the analogy that we use is kind of a first pass, how do we analyze a potentially disruptive technology, is saying, we use the salad analogy. Now the salad analogy is, I'm sure many people here have been to a restaurant and you order a salad, and what you really want are probably the 20% of what's on that plate that comes to you. It's those nuts, the cheese, the olives, and what do they give you? A huge bowl of lettuce, and you kind of nibble the stuff off the top and you hand back probably 50% of it. And you're paying north of 80, 90 Rand for that salad, and you're actually not consuming all of it. Probably the best example of an industry that got disrupted in terms of the salad business model is the music industry, where in the 1970s and 80s, people bought whole music albums where what they really wanted was the one or two songs. Along came iTunes in the sort of late 90s, and what happened is people then started actually sipping and buying one or two songs and not buying whole albums unless they were sort of very iconic particular albums that people were looking at. And in fact, if you look at the stats in the media, and particularly in the music industry, there's two ways of looking at it. The music industry is without a doubt way down in revenue terms, in real revenue terms, in terms of how much money they've lost overall. But you can either put that down to piracy or put that down to the fact that people are now buying single songs as opposed to albums. So there's two ways of looking at it. So what we do is we take the salad business model and ask a whole lot of questions about it. So we first of all ask, does it change the user experience in some way? Is it easy to use? Does it enable people to connect in different ways? And is it useful? I mean, that's one of the major things about innovation that really, really frustrates me. I actually hate the word innovation because it's a Smurf word. It means different things to different people. When people in our organization come up to you and saying, we're not being innovative enough, you've got innovation in your title, what are you doing about it? First thing always is, what do you mean by innovation? You're talking about product and technology innovation, you're talking about process and operations innovation, you're talking about strategy and marketing innovation. And then innovation comes in sizes, small, medium, and large, incremental innovation, and all the way through to breakthrough innovation. So there's a lot of ways to look at innovation, and one of the key things about innovation is it novel? So if you wanted to sum all of that up into one thing, is first of all, is it novel, but secondly, is it useful? So is it useful? Does it tap into potentially new revenue streams? Is it done at a lower cost? So now when you start looking at social Wi-Fi, it starts ticking a whole lot of these boxes. Is it a single or a multi-sided market? That's a very, very key question, because a single-sided market is somewhere where typical Wi-Fi coffee shop hotspot is a single-sided market. Somebody comes in, potentially pays for that Wi-Fi access, and they get internet access. So user asks for something, pays with money, gets what they asked for. A multi-sided model is the user pays with their privacy and some details about where they are and who they are, and then they get free Wi-Fi in return. But the point is exactly what Raj's point that he made earlier. If something's free, then you're the product. Is who then benefits from that information and who's the end customer. And a two-sided market is somebody consumes a service, but somebody else is paying for that service and getting something else in return. So immediately it's a multi-sided market, another tick in the box for us. Does it change the flow of value? Absolutely it does, because now if you think about it, one of the biggest issues for mobile operators is there's very few genuine use cases for true mobility. Most of the time, if you think about it, if you had to turn off your LTE or 3G on your phone and try and go completely wireless for a whole day or a whole week, you could probably get most of that right. I do that most of the time. I've got Wi-Fi in my house, Wi-Fi always on Wi-Fi at the airport, I've got Wi-Fi in the office, and I've got Wi-Fi at venues like these and Wi-Fi at the guest houses that I stay at when I travel or the hotels that I stay at when I travel. The only time I genuinely use mobile data is when I'm physically in a car, and I probably shouldn't be doing it because I'm driving. So, does it change the flow of value? Absolutely it does. It potentially changes the flow of value away from potentially mobile operators. Does it shift power from one player to another? Another tick in the box. Is there a multi-sided platform in play already? To an extent there is, because there's not enough time in the slot that I've been given to talk about what the meaning of platform, but mobile operators are very much platform players at the moment, and what you're doing is you're creating a competing platform potentially. And then there's a whole lot of things we call red flags. Now Gartner talks about social, mobile, and cloud and analytics. And if any new technology or combination of those in the business model touches on a social aspect, yes, this does. A mobile aspect, yes, this does. Cloud, to a limited extent, you could argue it does. And analytics, absolutely it does. This very much is something that goes into our sort of bullseye of something we really, really need to look at. And then I talk about this lettuce effect, which I spoke about earlier, which is kind of the salad model. And does it have the ability to actually potentially start unbundling somebody's bundle? So I touched on this earlier. This is just a sort of a depiction of your typical business model. The top one was our standard always-on model from about a year ago, where the user pays with money and receives Wi-Fi in return. And then the challenger business model is this business model below, which, as you can see very clearly, is a two-sided market where the user pays with identity and privacy and receives free Wi-Fi. And then obviously what gets sold to your retailers, your retail malls, and your brands is the analytics, the advertising, the location information, and the branding. Now, this is immediately quite a hard problem to solve, because what you're doing is you're taking something that used to cost a very, very easy to calculate value. You knew what your backhaul cost, you knew what your access points cost, you knew what your operational costs were. You could aggregate all of those across all your locations and how many users you had, and you can come up with a price. It's a lot harder to work out what the price and value of all of those other advertising analytics and all of those sorts of things are, and still provide a really good service that's free. So when something's disruptive, the classic definition of a disruptive business model actually came from Clayton Christensen. And really what it is, that blue line over there is what's called a sustaining technology. That's your typical, if you were, for example, a mobile operator, that would be your 3G and LTE data. If you were a mobile phone manufacturer, that would be the BlackBerries and the Nokias of this world. And what happens is that disruptive technology comes in generally from the bottom end of the market. And the thing that most people get wrong about disruptive technology is not immediately obvious that it's going to be disruptive. So typically what happens is it comes in as something which is kind of less than the current performance demanded at the high end of the market. This is exactly where Wi-Fi is. It doesn't, in most cases, provide the kind of performance that you can already get from your mobile operators. So what happens is it meets a kind of minimum standard, call it the low end of the market. And a great example of this was when Apple launched their iPhone. We tend to forget these days that what first happened when Apple came out is, when the iPhone came out, was that the Nokias and the BlackBerries and the Steve Ballmers of this world actually laughed at it. And they laughed at it for a good reason. It only had 2G, it had terrible battery life, and it didn't have a fixed keyboard. So what happens with organizations, and this is the people side of innovation where we always go wrong, they actually go through what are called something very, very similar to the 5 stages of grief, something that happens to you when somebody you know and love dies. You initially go through denial. And typically this is the technological people in your organization go, no, it's crummy, it doesn't work, it's got all of these things that are rubbish. Then what happens is you get anger when you see that actually, it turns out you were slightly wrong, as the bottom of the market actually starts adopting this technology. Then you get to a stage called bargaining, and this is exactly the stage that we got to as Internet Solutions. When we looked at the social Wi-Fi, is we saw all of these things and immediately said, well, we could do some of this stuff already. We can already do splash screen advertising. We can already collect analytics. We're already doing some of this. Whereas actually what we should have done is taken a step back and said, hang on a minute, maybe this is a completely different way of doing things and we don't actually necessarily want to attack this from a purely technical perspective. But you tend to get sucked into that cycle of bargaining, and this is exactly where the Nokias and the BlackBerries went down with the iPhone, is they started copying certain features of what the iPhone was doing, saying, well, we can do that too, as opposed to looking at it as a completely different platform and a completely different way of doing things. Because what Apple was coming in, it wasn't actually just a mobile phone, it was an entire ecosystem that they were bringing to the market, not just a physical end device. What you then get is the stage where you're starting to get to the point where it's actually taking most of your market share and you hit the point of depression, and then usually what happens with, example, BlackBerry and Nokia is you hit acceptance and you move on and you accept that that's one revenue stream that you kind of lost out on. So very, very interesting kind of people side of things and way to go through. And the real question here is, how do you, as an organization, so not become a Kodak, not become a Microsoft in terms of the Surface tablet debacle, not become a BlackBerry, not become a Nokia. And the trick is when you start seeing those sorts of stages, you need to be prepared for them and actually defend against them. So as I've mentioned before, innovation is a very difficult word, and one of the problems with innovation is a kind of myth about innovation, that all you need is some kind of secret source, some kind of secret code, some kind of open sesame, and you'll open up this magic treasure trove, Aladdin's cave of innovation wonders. Whereas in reality, innovation is actually all about process, it's about structure, it's about doing really, really difficult things and making really hard decisions. So one of the ways of actually doing that is, first of all, dividing your organization up into 3 horizons. So what you do in Horizon 1, that's your existing business, you're a mobile operator or you're a Wi-Fi operator doing sort of always-on type things, you extend and defend your core business and you basically do incremental innovation in Horizon 1. That's the here and the now, that's taking new technologies that arrive and just making them work for you. On the top end, you have Horizon 3, you have a team of people, that's my team at Internet Solutions, you're actually just looking out for all this new stuff, analyzing it using all kinds of techniques, and then saying, that's the stuff that we need to be aware of and potentially could be disruptive or useful for our organization. And the really, really hard stuff is the blue. That's the guys in Horizon 2 that are building your emerging businesses. Your entrepreneurs, your startups internally, or your skunk works, whatever you want to call it. Those guys are difficult to actually get right, because those are typically the people that are bothering everybody in the organization. So I thought I'd actually killed the slide, but it doesn't matter. Really, just the message on this slide here is the Horizon 1 stuff is the easiest because it's actually the zone of the most certainty. Whereas the Horizon 3 stuff is your zone of your least certainty, but it doesn't matter if you're right or wrong, because none of the stuff is actually going to impact anybody today. And the guys who've got the hardest jobs are the Horizon 2 guys, because it's the emerging change that may or may not actually work out. It's the most sort of risky in terms, but it has the most immediate impact. So there's a whole lot of tools you can use. We've got lists and lists of them. This is just an example of one. This is something we call a technology radar. And the way to think about it is you're an air traffic controller. There's 3 horizons. The furthest horizon on the radar is Horizon 3. Oh, sorry, is Horizon 3. And then what you do is you actually map these new and emerging technologies onto this radar in terms of how close to maturity they are. So if something's in Horizon 3, you're just watching it. Something's in Horizon 2, you're potentially playing with it, maybe starting up something, testing out business models. Something's in Horizon 1. If you're not already doing it, you should be asking yourself why, if it's a relevant technology in your industry. Another way to look at this is actually mapping the 3 horizons thing onto what Gartner call a street process. So I don't know if everyone's aware of the Gartner hype cycle. I think there's this room of people. Normally when I talk to financial services companies, I have to spend 5 minutes explaining the Gartner hype cycle. I don't have the time. I don't think I need to. But what happens now with Gartner, just about every technology goes through an initial technology trigger, hits a peak of inflated expectations when it's a media darling. Suddenly it turns out that actually there were certain things that couldn't do all that well, and it hits what's called a trough of disillusionment. Then slowly we find that actually it was quite useful, just not as amazing as the media made it out to be. It hits the slope of enlightenment, and then finally the plateau of productivity. And the problem is most of your Horizon 1 operational businesses focus there on the plateau of productivity and ignore everything on the left of the Gartner hype cycle. What you need to do is have an organizational structure where there's people physically focused just on Horizon 3, people doing things in Horizon 2, and then people actually doing your business, making the money that actually pays your salary in Horizon 1. And these people are very different kinds of people. Sorry, that's a very busy slide, so don't focus on every aspect of the table. Just really what you're talking about is the types of people and the metrics. So the types of people in your Horizon 1 are your maintainers and enhancers of your technology, the guys who keep the lights on. The types of people on the right are your champions and your entrepreneurs and explorers. Sorry, your champions and explorers, and the guys who are actually doing the stuff that's going to make a difference in your life, but not quite now, are your builders and your entrepreneurs. And really what you're looking for in terms of business cases, when you're doing product development in Horizon 1, it's all about business cases, returns on investment, all of those typical calculations we all do. On the right, it's really just about finding viable options. And in the middle, it's actually about building new businesses. That's just a slide showing the difficulty of getting this right in an organization, because on the right-hand side, your Horizon 3 scouting people aren't bothering anybody. They've got their heads in the clouds, they're talking to your senior executives, they might be feeding information down into the organization, or they should be, but fundamentally they're not bothering anyone's day-to-day business. The guys on the left are building all the stuff, and they're actually the real heroes that are actually bringing in the revenue, and the guys on the right are the ones who are messing with product development rigor because they've got to be a lot more flexible. They're leveraging some of the existing assets and capabilities, so taking away resources from people who are actually making real money. It's very difficult to seamlessly transfer innovations into your core organization because they've built it in a different way and it doesn't fit into your organizational standards. And potentially there's completely new skills and processes. So the example, again, that we're using with our social Wi-Fi is there's a whole lot of big data and analytics skills that Internet Solutions, the company, just didn't have. There's a whole lot of media marketing, outdoor advertising skills that Internet Solutions didn't have as an organization. And of course, you're right in the middle of all those alignment conflicts. But what happens if you get this right is that you get an ability to have your Horizon 1 focusing on the blue line and your Horizon 3 and 2 targeting that red line. And potentially, if you do this well, you can actually avoid being disrupted as an organization. So really, just second last slide is, what are some of the lessons we learned doing this? Well, the real trick there is, do you incubate or increment? So when some new technology comes along, do you stick it into your Horizon 1 teams because it's close to your existing business, or do you actually incubate it as a brand new way of doing business? It's a very, very hard decision. Second of all, a lot of these things potentially cannibalize your existing revenue. If you've got a high revenue business, you're a mobile operator with mobile data, and you come along with free Wi-Fi, are you going to be offsetting all of that correctly with the new business model, or is it going to grow into that, or are you actually just going to have to accept that if you don't cannibalize yourself, somebody else is going to? Basically, I've touched on the denial, anger, and bargaining, so I'm not going to mention it. In this particular instance, something that's very, very important is privacy. It's a hard and hot topic. There's a whole lot of issues around the POPI Act. There's a whole lot of social and people issues around privacy. It's very easy to say that the privacy ship has sailed. Google and Facebook and all of that have stolen our privacy, and people must just get used to it and accept it. It's not that easy. And then the last thing, really, just a last point on two-sided business models, is when you enter a space where it's not just the technology but the business models change, there's absolutely something that you don't know. And one of the biggest problems we have as technologists is we tend to dismiss things we don't know. We assume that they're relatively easy. But you've actually got to go through that stage of unconscious incompetence to the stage of conscious incompetence, and then hopefully finally competence. So just as a last point, I just like this Charles Darwin quote, really, because it just comes up time and time again. It's not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent. It's actually the ones that are most responsive to change. And unless you design your organization to be responsive to change, and actually to change with these technologies, is not just about the new and novel technologies, it's about actually adapting our people and our business processes and our whole businesses around them. you're actually not going to succeed. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Brian, for that very useful talk on Wi-Fi analytics and then a dissertation on innovation. Brian is very passionate about that. So those of you, I'm sure there's a lot of a couple of entrepreneurs in the group or people who are also doing innovation within their organizations. I've got his cell phone number if you do want that. We didn't manage to do. We're set for a break now, so we will be going to that right now. We didn't manage to have the talk by Ton. The WBA is an organization which the Wi-Fi Forum is going to be a member of. They are going to provide us, and we have had discussions with them, with a lot of value adds. For members, we will be able to have, for certain members, high-paying members, some free tickets to the conferences that they're going to produce around the world. They're also going to assist us with some training programs. As some of you who may know, the WBA is, it's a technical body as well, looking at standards, which we will have first-hand information to that. So we have decided we will try and get Ton back. So if we can, we were supposed to go to the trucks immediately after break, but if we can come back to this room, the techies will try and bring Ton back on. It was just a matter of sound. I could see everything was working fine. Just getting the computer to basically spit out the sound. So let's come back here so that we can hear about the great stuff that the WBA is doing and how also they can benefit the Wi-Fi Forum. So 15-minute break, please. The ushers will ask you to come back. So literally, 15 minutes is 11:25.